Less than an inch. That's how much column space the Daily Telegraph gave the first ever Cricket World Cup match. In 1973, New Zealand were heavily favoured against Jamaica, having beaten them in a warm-up. The game was supposed to be on the iconic Kew Green, a beautiful place to start a huge movement in the sport. But it pissed down rain, and no one turned up. The newspapers, which had barely been excited in the first place, didn't cover the washout. There were no think pieces about how unfortunate it was that cricket had come up with this international carnival, and on its first day, it was flooded with no one there to notice. Day one of the Cricket World Cup concept was an utter failure. The event wasn't generating much buzz beforehand either. County cricket and the touring New Zealand men's team got the attention. Wimbledon was coming soon as well, and when the press did show an interest, it didn't always go well. Frank Keating in The Guardian wrote that the photographers went to the nets hoping to get upskirts of the bowlers. Lords didn't even allow women to play there, despite hosting schoolboys and celebrities. And even when they trained on the nursery ground, it made news. The reason there were no matches at Lords was the MCC couldn't work out whether women would get changed. They wouldn't be allowed into the members' pavilion because of their lack of penises. Billie Jean King won at Wimbledon that year. It was remarkable they found a locker room for her. Cricket and media didn't care or mock them. Major grounds weren't used, TV did not see this as something worth covering, and it was being run by amateurs who'd never done anything like this before. This was cricket's first global tournament, and no one was watching. But because of these women and one filthy rich man, the sport changed forever. No one at the ground in Kew Green could have known that they were building a billion-dollar industry that day, inch by inch. Overthrowing cricket's empire is just another cricket history book, but this time written from the other side. Get your copy today. The Women's Cricket Association was formed in 1926, largely by ladies of leisure, the one percenters who had enough money, time and clout to play cricket. It was a very amateur sport with infrequent series between Australia, New Zealand and England. Married women weren't always allowed to play. How could they possibly leave their families? Smaller grounds were used and radio didn't broadcast the vast majority of their matches. More than 40 years later, a 1969 UK Sports Council report declared that women's cricket was dying. There were good reasons for this. The matches were falling off. Money wasn't coming in, and when they played, the crowds were almost non-existent. There is an adage that you should never fight with someone who buys ink by the barrel. Women's cricket could barely get a thimble's worth. Entire matches given an inch or less of column space. It wasn't about to grow like women's tennis. That looked almost impossible. The women's liberation movement was not coming to cricket. It was an isolated amateur game in obscurity. Yet in the middle of that, something bizarre happened. Women's cricket shot for the moon, and their astronaut was Rachel Heyhoe Flint. She was living in a world where newspapers would describe her as hazel-eyed Rachel, an attractive and sharp-witted little number of 34. All this while she was a legend who hit the first six in Test and ODIs, batted for 521 minutes in making 179 against Australia at the Oval to force a draw, a world record at that time, averaged 45 in Tests with 300s. And when she retired her 19-year career, she'd made 33% more runs than any other woman. She was the cricketer of her time, and up until recently, of all time. And this is just on the field. Off it, she was the first woman inducted into the ICC's Hall of Fame, and one of the first two women appointed to the board of the ECB. She became a House of Lords peer, a baroness. She was on the board of Wolverhampton Wanderers and was one of the first ever women's sports commentators. I could go on. So while women's cricket was dying, it had in Heyhoe Flint a voice, an activist, a journalist and a star. This was also concurrent to the very idea of ladies or girls cricket as a controversial topic at that point. Len Hutton once said of it, absurd, like a man trying to knit. Or it was simply laughed at. The words spoken about it were truly bizarre. Keith Miller wrote in the Daily Express, "Gone with the days of flat chests and hairy legs. These girls had curvaceous figures and beauty. My vote for the cutest looking cricketer goes to opening bat Donna Carmino, a 16-year-old schoolgirl from Trinidad." Amongst the many things wrong with this, the fact that he adds that she's an underage schoolgirl is completely fucked up. Because of the era and chat about tennis, England captain Mike Brearley suggested that the women could go up against men in a battle of the sexes type game. Heyhoe Flint took that and spun it into PR. She was as good with the bat as she was at playing the media. But what her and women's cricket couldn't do was make any money. Enter one of England's maddest millionaires, Jack Hayward, or as he was known, Union Jack. This was an eccentric millionaire who bought islands and saved boats and planes for the British people. He also said, if I had my way, I'd form my own party even more right-wing than Margaret Thatcher. I'd bring back national service, the scaffold, the cat o' nine tails, the empire. Places like Sierra Leone and Nigeria were so much better off under British rule than they are now. Someone talking like that is not a person you assume is going to be pushing a progressive cause. Hayward is about the most unlikely ally to the women's lib movement. But he really adored Heyhoe Flint. And so at his Sussex home in 1971, they smoked cigars and sipped whiskey while discussing how to make women's cricket bigger. At one stage, late in the night, Heyhoe Flint suggested that they could try a Women's World Cup. It was an idea that had been whispered within men's cricket, but really nothing more. The timing was important. England had won the Men's Football World Cup in 1996. So the country had World Cup fever. Heyhoe Flint and Hayward were both football fans, and so the idea was born. Heyhoe Flint was known for being very persuasive, and she must have been, to convince the empire man millionaire to spend all of his money on bringing in women cricketers from around the globe. Hayward didn't even allow foreign cars to come onto his estate, yet here he was planning to bring in women from around the world. Quite a turn for a man who also said, I imagined myself as the Cecil Rhodes of the 20th century. But Jack was clear, I like women and I like cricket. And from that problematic statement came cricket's first World Cup. Heyhoe Flint was clear that it wouldn't be cheap. She was a pragmatist and she knew her sums. Hayward's reply, so what? I'm a millionaire. He dropped £40,000, which is about $600,000 in today's money, so just shy of $1 million US. It's not a huge amount, but it's a lot when you think this wasn't an investment. It was purely a donation. And it wasn't going into a well-oiled machine, but rather an amateur group that, in their history, had never seen money like this. For Hayward, it was a few inches off the top of his pile. To women's cricket, it was like a mountain of cash. His donation gifted us World Cups. This was a DIY tournament. There was no structure or template. The idea of a global tournament was awesome, but women's cricket didn't actually have many teams. It was still basically three nations, England, Australia and New Zealand. India and Pakistan had not yet played a test at this point, and the West Indies as a women's side had not formed. This is where the organisers just made sides happen. They invited two teams from the Caribbean, Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago. They then put in a young English 11 to flesh out their fixtures, and finally they chose an international team. That might seem weird, but even the first Men's World Cup had an East Africa side, and with the West Indies, cricket was just used to assembling teams. It was like someone adding a few inches to their height for a dating profile. But the International 11 was more than a white lie. The white bit was important, as they were South Africa without the name. With global politics shunning the apartheid government, the organisers couldn't bring in the South African team, so they improvised. In Raf Nicholson's book, Ladies and Lords, she has a chapter called Who Are We to tell the South Africans how to run their country. That is a quote from Heyhoe Flint, someone who knew enough about politics and had been over there to see what apartheid really meant. Yet it was her decision to try and get South Africa into the tournament by rebranding them. Heyhoe Flint is a hero and pioneer to cricket, but here she was just wrong. Sadly, she never saw, even for decades after this, that what she was doing was akin to the men who thought the women shouldn't play cricket at all. She also risked the thing she loved. In trying to get South Africa into the tournament, she almost brought the walls down on herself. Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago were prepared to pull out of the tournament if the South Africans remained. They made the right call, and without those sides, there really wasn't much of a global footprint. So Heyhoe Flint and the organisers relented. The International 11 was reborn and filled with random women who hadn't been chosen for the other main sides. This means that the first World Cup was played by 3 test-playing nations. 2 first-class teams that would later merge, a young 11, and leftovers. Like building a house from whatever you find discarded on the street. The key part to making this tournament work was going to be the cricket. On the 23rd of June, 3 matches were played. At Dean Park in Bournemouth, young England's top scorer was extras with 12. They did not have a batter past 10. Australia fell to 9 for 3 before not losing another wicket. Not an ideal match. In St Albans, New Zealand bowled out Trinidad and Tobago for 61 and won very easily. At Hove, England smashed 258 in their first innings. The opening partnership was 246, still a World Cup record today, when Lynn Thomas was run out at the death for 134. Enid Bakewell brought up her 100 as well, and the International 11 had no hope. 3 huge wins for the best teams, and not a contest among them. Better cricket came soon though. At Chesterfield, New Zealand batted first against the international team. They made 136, but while their opposition was a collection of random players, one of them was Audrey Disbury, who played for England over a 12-year career. When she was out for 44, the international 11 had 64, meaning they were basically halfway there. But the international all sorts just kept losing wickets. And at 126 for 8, they had 4.1 overs to get the remaining 11 runs. And somehow they do it, pulling off a huge upset in a thrilling match from the final delivery. The papers went wild with their coverage. Well, I can assume maybe some of them did. This was the biggest match report I could find. The game of the tournament, and probably an all-time classic, was the West Indies derby, Jamaica versus Trinidad and Tobago at Ealing. According to the Middlesex County Times, the standard of play was very reasonable, which is a bizarre way to explain this game because it was absolutely nuts. Jamaica lost their second wicket in the 15th over. They had scored 13 runs by then. The middle order actually did some damage because of an attacking 16 from Alison Peggy Fairweather, who, if nothing else, has a spectacular name. For Trinidad and Tobago, Jane Joseph took 2 for 14. I mention her in part because this is one of my favourite cricket photos ever. A full swing of the bat, brilliantly shaped afro, a pigtailed fielder, random cars and buildings in the background. This was at Fenners for TNT's match against Young England, but it also shows what we are dealing with. This is not one-day cricket or a World Cup like we know it. And it's also not the only cool photo of Joseph I found from that tournament. And of course, all we have is a few photos and one really good report as the Guardian sent their hockey writer Nancy Tompkins to the ground. Jamaica made a very gettable 97 in 51.5 overs, but started strong in the field, running out the TNT opener with a score on 2. That started a collapse as they slid to 10 for 3 before Louise Brown took over. And you need to know an awful lot about her. Her sister Louise played for the West Indies. Another sister Anne captained them. And even her mum played against England once. And as for Louise, she was the first West Indies captain. She could play. And that was lucky for TNT because they were in a bad way, especially when Louise's sister Beverly was dismissed for 19. They lost 2 more with a score on 93, meaning they required 5 runs to win with only 2 wickets in hand. Brown brings up her 50, but finds herself stuck at the wrong end. Jeanette James, their number 10, is on strike to Leela Williams, a future West Indies player. And with plenty of time left, it was probably worth James, who still hadn't scored, blocking it out for Brown to come back on strike. Instead, James swings hard, like a proper number 10. But she gets an edge and the ball flies up in the air on the offside. It will be a simple take, so James decides to walk towards the pavilion. She turns as the catch is dropped, sees her moment and sprints through for the winning runs. That's a cricket version of just styling it out. It might be one of the more ridiculously fun games in World Cup history, and only a few people saw it. Online, there is still almost no footage of this tournament. One of the uploads you can find is mostly on the fact a royal gave the trophy. But the actual cricket footage is pretty slim. It's like they built a structure but had no money for electricity, so the tournament was in the dark. This video is brought to you by our supporters on Patreon. If you want to be part of the community that makes content like this, head over now. Rachel Heyhoe Flint not only organised and played, but she also reported on the event. That is definitely the greatest all-round effort ever in cricket. Some of her journalism was bizarre, but this was a weird time in sport, let alone for feminism. In early 1973, tennis legend Billie Jean King had played in the famous Battle of the Sexes match against Bobby Riggs. Then her and other women's tennis players started fighting for equal pay, which the US Open agreed to that year. Wimbledon, by the way, held out until 2007. And so women's lib was the term used in many articles about the World Cup. But Heyhoe Flint was not a bra-burning feminist. And I don't mention that randomly. She actually wrote that in her Evening Standard piece. At every point, she made it clear that she was not a progressive on any topic. She just wanted women's cricket to grow. She had to be a member of the establishment to get into the rooms that she did. But while she was a conservative at heart and politically, in cricket, she was rebellious. And that was not easy. In one of her articles for the Daily Telegraph, she wrote, England's games are at Hove, Exmouth, Bradford, Ilford, Wolverhampton and Edgbaston. And if you look at games outside of where England played, there were games in Bournemouth, St Albans, Tring, Chesterfield, Sittingbourne, Ealing and Dartford. If you're a cricket fan, you'll probably realise these are not big name cricket venues outside of Edgbaston. And that was a problem for women's cricket from the start. Some of these places were beautiful grounds, but the facilities were not always up to scratch. Weirdly enough, England did play at the Oval that year, but not in the World Cup. Instead, it was against an old England 11. One of the promo photos is Dennis Compton leaning in to suck the soul out of Heyhoe Flint through her mouth. So when it was to watch a geriatric Len Hutton push the ball through covers, the England women got a big ground. But to play in the World Cup, it was Ilford and Exmouth. They were trapped in small venues with a non-existing marketing budget and no real help from the newspapers, TV or radio, which meant that for most of these matches, hardly anyone turned up. One of the games was in Bletchley, which is right around the corner from where the Enigma machine was invented. During World War II, this was one of the most secretive places on Earth. And down the road, 28 years later, they were trying to make a global showcase, but instead had one of the most invisible World Cups ever. Wet conditions marred this tournament, and some of that is just bad luck. But there are also things that wouldn't have affected the men. Many of the women did not own spikes. And as these were small venues, drainage and ground staff were poor. You can only work with what you have, and the organisers were trying to make magic out of club venues and English weather. When it was wet, it took longer to clear up. And then the women had to run in and bowl without spikes on a damp surface. The umpires made harsh calls on whether the games could go ahead, so matches had to be abridged all the time. With all that in a limited overs tournament, you really need a great system for shortening matches. They absolutely did not have that. Most of us have grown up on the Duckworth-Lewis method, a flawed yet useful system to ensure that limited overs matches can be saved when the rain comes. Before that was the most productive overs method, a Richie Benaud inspired system that really didn't make much sense. But back in 1973, we had the average run rate method, a horrible system that basically said if you had a total of 300 in the first innings and the second team only had 25 overs, they would chase 150. You can probably already see the issue here. It does not factor in wickets. In a match that was basically a semi-final between England and New Zealand, the rain came beforehand, so it was changed to 35 overs each. The Kiwis made 105 for 7 from theirs, and England were 34 for 1 after 15 overs. But at the crease were Lynn Thomas and Heyhoe Flint. Behind them in the order was Enid Bakewell. These were the 3 leading run scorers in the tournament, and all of them averaged in the 80s. It is still one of the greatest top orders that any women's team has ever had. And at the 15 over mark, with the match easily within their grasp, it rained for the rest of the day and England lose by 11 runs. This moment could have ruined the entire plan, which was weirdly not to have a final, but to ensure that the last match was between Australia and England, with the hopes it became a default final. Luckily for the organisers, New Zealand's first match, and the first ever in a World Cup, was washed out. And the loss against the international women in that thriller meant that the Kiwis didn't have enough points. So the gerrymander works, and England meet Australia in the last match. The home side bats first. Thomas falls with the score on 101. Heyhoe Flint at 218. Bakewell completes 100, and England surge to 279. Australia start cleanly and then lose 2 for 1 and never really recover. A real princess, Anne, is a shiny trophy to the Queen of Cricket. Heyhoe Flint made runs and won a World Cup as a captain, but that was nothing. Because before that, she waved her wand, borrowed a checkbook, invented a concept, and manufactured a global event from nothing. This tournament changed everything. The men were inspired by their counterparts and started hosting their own tournament, but gave a percentage of to the true pioneers. And lords, embarrassed by not hosting a game, changed their membership to allow women into their beautiful pavilion. Women and men's cricket was seen as the same, and we all lived in fields of lollipops and lemonade. No, obviously none of that happened. The MCC did host a women's ODI in 1976, and then straight after in 1987. From then on, they held them regularly, except when they'd forget them for years. In fact, since they held the 2017 World Cup final, they've managed to fit in only 2 more. In 1991, Heyhoe Flint applied for membership of Lords, with famous people supporting it. The MCC voted 4,727 against and 2,371 for. But in 1998, they finally allowed in women members. Unsurprisingly, Heyhoe Flint was in the first induction. Her friend Union Jack Hayward went on to prop up Wolverhampton Wanderers for years. But it is still remarkable that the arch-empire man turned cricket into a truly global game. After years on their own, in 2005, the women's governing body was brought into the ICC. It gave organisational structure well beyond anything we'd seen before in women's cricket. But also for the first time, women were not running their game, and it was an afterthought with the ICC for many years. But it did take the sport to a bigger platform. By 1997, there were around 50,000 in attendance at Eden Gardens. In 2020, the MCG hosted 86,174 people at the final. And in 2017, Lords was sold out when England beat India. But this story isn't just about the rise of the women's game. It's about cricket pioneers building something. This ad hoc collection of schoolgirls, mums, sisters, and die-hard amateurs gifted the sport something it never had, a global showcase. The men hadn't staged a multi-team tournament in more than 60 years. The women assembled one from scraps. They all got together to give us the World Cup, which they built piece by piece, inch by inch, with their own hands. One side lifted the trophy, but all of them changed the game. Are you as chronically online as Moses Enriquez? Then here's another video for you. Or if you also like books and stuff, you can buy my new one on the art of batting. If you loved this video, hit the bell icon to be notified for more.